been. Oh yeah, I've been going deep. I've got hours and hours and hours now of interviews with the three of them and other people who've intersected with them. So I'm going to definitely
You should talk to Alan DeBoer as
do
well.
that. Yeah, they
It
told
was
me.
when Alan was head of the archive and I was reference
This is
librarian.
Joe Hickerson, by the way. I just want to identify
Hi,
this.
Joe. Put in the date. They came down from Cornell with this idea of starting, not sure if it was starting a record company, but at least putting out records, recordings of white protest folk singers, like Sarah Ogungunning, Aunt Molly Jackson, and Jim Garland, and Florence Reese.
Now, is it your understanding that they had not yet put out any records at all?
Oh,
at this
no,
time?
no.
Okay.
And there's a period of time, and you'd have to look up the years, you probably know better than I, that they were coming in quite a bit because 2 or 3 of their names would be in the guest books. You know, and then a couple months later there they'd be again.
Yeah.
And after a while they'd be putting Rounder Collective.
Right.
Where it says institution or something like that. And they did come out with the Aunt Molly Jackson. They didn't come out with any of the others. They also wanted to do one of Texas Gladden and Hobart Smith. Unfortunately, they got Alan Lomax to agree to write the booklet.
He's still doing it.
Yes, he's still doing it. Right?
Yes, they talked to me about that story of it.
Right. That would have been a good one. So that's how I met them early on.
What did they do there? Did they just hang out and listen to tapes, or
They listened, read the literature, whatever we could show them, talk with Alan, talk with me.
did they ever stay at your house? I know they crashed.
No,
with
they
Alan.
may have stayed with Alan, they may have stayed with Ralph.
They did stay with Alan. I didn't.
Yeah,
know
because
that.
he lived in town, I lived way out in the woods.
I see. Okay.
At that time, I believe.
Okay. Now you joined the library, right? I guess at the peak of the commercial boom, pretty much.
63, you could measure it in a certain way. There were 4 active nightclubs for folk music. 3 to 4 at that time in 63, 64, and into 65. There had been some coffee shops, coffee houses. There had been a jazz club. There still is a jazz club. I think it's still there. The jazz club, the Stardust, the Showboat, run by Charlie Bird, which featured folk musicians before I came. That was in the late 50s, early 60s. And all of a sudden there was Basson's Top of the Walk, the Cellar Door, the Show Shadows, and then there were CD out-of-the-way places like the Crow's Toe, and the Unicorn House, or whatever it was called. And lots of concerts, Listener Auditorium, University of Maryland. They have little coffee houses in these places too. So you could go out any night. And I used to go out. I was young then, unmarried. And so, Judy Collins. We always have, whoever was singing, you'd always have mutual friends. Bonnie Dobson. I said, I was Dick Bauman's roommate. Oh, Dickie Bauman, first person to teach me guitar. Mm-hmm. Some of them I would get like the next day to come into the archive and sign the guest book. So in some of those early pages you see Judy Collins and Jesse Colin Young, Pat Webb and Short Daniels. They were kind of lived in the area. And people like that. Jose Feliciano came in. His first performance in D.C. was at the Brickskeller. He came in with 2 Seeing Eye Girls, but he never sang the guest book. Underneath her.
Seeing Eye Girls, great.
So there was all this hyperactivity that had developed, starting with the Kingston Trio, and that's another period there. It just developed. You know, and folk music became a household word in the industry, like, as Bob and Ray would put it, like slop bucket. And so and I think I must mention this kind of visual image in my essay in the Ron Cohen book. Because I've always thought of the folk revival as an underground activity with occasional mixed metaphors, solar flare of a person, a song, a style, or combination thereof into the mainstream of pop music. And these sometimes fizzle out. There was the Weavers in 50-51. There was Calypso and Skiffle in 55. But the Kingston Trio in 57-58 led to a steady stream for several years. Every record company had to have their folk recordings they recruited, and they got the trios that were already existing in, or they auditioned and got the matching voices, Peter, Paul, and Mary. And then everybody else, pop singers, etc., would sing. Chorales would do their folk LPs. And you go to any record store and there'd be a folk bin, and you had no idea what was going to be in it. And it was big. Meanwhile, what about all the rest of us and those folks who were sitting around making music and liked Pete Seeger but didn't want to go to nightclubs and listen to all these new arrangements? So a lot of these folk song clubs, some of them already existed. A lot of colleges. Oberlin Folk Song Club was created in 56, 57. It's kind of a natural adjunct to Pete Seeger's concertizing and crusading to some extent. But when things really became big, all of a sudden, like in Washington, D.C., I'll use that as an example, people would get together at parties at people's houses and then, gee, too bad they're not bringing Guy Carawan, too bad they're not bringing this or that, you know. These people are falling through the cracks, or, you know, what's happening to you getting, just people getting together and having a round robin or a folk sing or an open sing or a hoot without standing in front of people. So that's how the Folklore Society of Greater Washington was formed. You know, a bunch of people finally got themselves organized. Well, Lonnie Herman came up with a draft constitution, or bylaws, sort of a mixture of the University of Chicago, where she had gone, and the Philadelphia Folk Song Society, which was already going strong and getting big with their festival. So, by God, we had to have our organization meeting, and we started. And we tried to have those activities then that were not being covered by the big venues. Open sings, concerts by visiting artists who otherwise wouldn't have a venue, and recreational stuff, people doing it themselves. And I insisted that it be called Folklore Society because Washington, D.C. is kind of funny. You have, at that time, you had state folklore societies, but you had very local folk song clubs or societies, either a city or a college or university, mostly. And I said, this is what's the District of Columbia? It's a region too. Let's put folklore in, if only to leave ourselves open for certain events that we might want to have that people might scratch their head. It's called Folk Music or Folk Song Society. So when I was program chair, I was personally put on a dance program, film program. A little while later, we had a storytelling event. Shocking. Now, all these are they're extreme specialized stuff. You have the general quiet revival organization, and then it gets bifurcated and separated into, when you get enough people, into the hammer dulcimer, the pluck dulcimer, the Balkan, the Morris dancers, and so on and so forth. Whereas back in '63, it was hard to get. I put on a dance program with square, American square, English country, Scottish country, and Irish. And, you know, I could find just about one or two people or a whole set to do these. Well, the American Square, that was easy. But, you know, I got 4 couples from Baltimore who did English country dancing because they went to Berea and Pinewoods. Now there are people who do nothing but that.
Right.
Interesting.
And your members were they like you? Educated, Anglo,
Well, mostly.
middle class, or headed toward middle class?
Mostly. I was kind of an anomaly because I had studied folklore.
Right.
In fact, there's always a suspicion about people. There's kind of a latent, occasional anti-eggheadism in the folk revival. And I've met people who were very uncomfortable just because I was there, just because of my background. Had nothing to do with me. So after they hear a few wretched puns and stuff from me, they kind of, oh, well, he seems kind of like an ordinary sort of
Okay, guy.
Right. Can't be that bad.
Would you bring in performers though, just play in a more informal setting, or do it all yourself?
Oh, yeah. One of the things was a monthly concert. And the first one was going to be Seamus Ennis, who happened to be in town. He couldn't. And the early ones, there was a kind of a lecture demonstration on the pluck dulcimer with Howie Mitchell and John Putnam. They were both local. But then, within a few months, we were able to put on the McPeak family from Northern Ireland. So it was not, and one of the bylaws said that we could not pay members to do programs without special board consent. So the only time I ever got paid with on an event officially sponsored by FSCW was my 35th anniversary / retirement concert, which I did at a local venue, which was sponsored by FSCW.
Now, in terms of your work at the archive, did it? Well, I don't know if you have a perspective going back. You joined it, as we said earlier, kind of at the height of the big commercial boom. But did those periods of boom?
But I got into folk music earlier than that.
Right. Did those periods of boom, as they might have come up, change the nature of collecting, or what's coming into you?
What coming in? Well, it's a matter. Well, first of all, the folk archive never had a very specific, like, you know, you go into library school, you take a course or a section on acquisitions policies. Well, we never had a statement as to what folklore, folk music, or folk life later on how we were guided in acquiring stuff. I just happened to be very eclectic, and I wanted to acquire, because I was doing it personally, I wanted to acquire stuff, spin-offs from authentic folk music, anything that had to do with revival, survival, lateral spin-offs or whatever. And so I was trying to get all those little newsletters in, flyers and posters.
Right.
Hopefully the newsletters, not starting with issue number 2, seem to happen a lot of times. Hopefully flyers and posters that have the year.
Yeah, that drives me crazy.
Thank you for having the year, but of course, it doesn't say University of Texas.
Yeah. It's funny, that drives me nuts. When did this happen?
So, and that kind of openness to the revival of what was going on all levels, it didn't seem to be there much before I came, but I couldn't help it because I was a singer, and I grew up in college and graduate school, organizing and having a record company and selling records on campus and putting on concerts and being in concerts and stuff like that. So it just seemed like a natural thing to do. So a lot of the folkies started to come in to use the archive, or at least to make a pilgrimage, or at least to visit and sign a guest book. And then after a while, in terms of acquisitions of field recordings, we got Lionel Kilberg's 100 or more tapes of his radio shows on WBAI. We got a whole bunch of Erwin Silber and Barbara Dane's tapes of radio shows, interviews for radio shows. All John Ginny Dildine's tapes when they moved, which included some of their hoots. They had hoots going back to the late 50s. His radio shows, he had a radio show going back to the late 50s. On one of which, and was on tape, is the first, shall we say, organized assemblage and music making of the following 3 people: Tom Paley, John Cohen, and Mike Seeger. They had paired off at places up until then, but John had them, I think they were all together at a hoot, one of the Dildine's hoots, and then John brought them on the radio station that night.
So you've got those tapes.
Yeah.
And I think that's recounted in this month's Old Time Herald. If you saw, there's a history of them in there. I remember vaguely. I read
I've not been seeing that recently. I'm missing. I don't have a chance to glance at a lot of those like I used to.
Yeah.
Well, Mike Seeger had a copy of that too, because he issued one cut of it on one of his one of his anthologies,
Right.
I think.
And then on through the 70s and 80s and until your retirement or roughly more or less the present day, what types of things would you get that would, or if you would, of, what might have been called, poor choice of words in this context, but called traditional folkloric performances? What kind of collections would come in, when Lomax would go out and do his field recordings and deposit them in the archives, or...
No, we don't use the word deposit.
Okay.
I mean, he did it for the archive, and so they were part of the archive.
Right.
Archive staff field work was interrupted by World War II, naturally. All field work was. There was no materials. Didn't mean the acquisition stopped. We were getting a lot of stuff from Latin American countries. We then had the recording lab, which was able to get old collections like cylinders and aluminum discs from other people who had made acetate discs and copy them onto state-of-the-art 16-inch acetate discs at that time, and later tape. But then when the war was over, there was enough availability of recording equipment that Duncan Emmerich, who's head then, started to encourage the setting up of regional folklore archives. And he'd even loan equipment, disc equipment. And then copies would feed in, or they'd be made at the libraries. The regional facility and the national facility would each have a copy. And that's kind of been one idea behind the acquisitions of the archive since that time. The fieldwork done by archive staff has been much less frequent because some more people were doing it, and there was so much stuff there now, and so much demand for cataloging, or if only minimal cataloging, which we did, and more demand for it and about the subject matter in general. I mean, getting letters, telephone calls, and people coming in asking for this and that. And then I became very aware right at the beginning that you had to be sensitive what people thought was folk music. At first, maybe once or twice, it didn't take me long though, that when somebody came in looking for something on Bob Dylan, it was not your place to get into a discussion with that person about the place of Bob Dylan in the scheme of things, folkloristically.
Okay.
People come, oh, folk on the door, oh, Bob Dylan. We put Bob Dylan stuff there.
Yes.
I bought a little bibliography of Bob Dylan, the first one ever published.
Okay.
A few books and articles mostly. So I was compiling and publishing little bibliographies on the first that ever appeared on the Pluck Dulcimer and the Hammer Dulcimer. Films of folklore. We had a festival list every year until it got totally out of hand. Around 1974, and we had 740 listings. And I said to the National Folk Festival Association, I think you should be doing that, not National Folk Festival. This is kind of a national listing folk festival. Then Joe Wilson came on board and changed the name. And he told me why. He said he didn't like the name of an organization that gave people a very specific idea of what they should be doing.
It's interesting.
National Folk Festival Association, very specific. National Council for the Traditional Arts. You don't know whether it's private, public, government. Do whatever you want. A lot of good stuff.
But how far could you take that? Because obviously folk, if you go into the folk bin in Tower Records, you're going to see not just Bob Dylan. Well, you don't see him in the folk bin any longer. He's in rock. But you see 10,000 singer-songwriters. Many of them are very good, but how far do you take it?
Yeah.
I don't know if people walk that into.
Well, I'll tell you,
just don't do
the
it.
last few folk alliances that I went to and was still employed by the library, I went to everybody's table. I said, do you have a copy of this in the Library of Congress? Sign up for a copy? No, here.
Mm-hmm.
So I would lug home or have somebody drive bags of stuff home for the. No, I mean.
And you were happy to take it in?
Yeah.
And their presence
I don't
there
care whether I
is-
like it or not, or whether I even listen to it.
Oh, yeah, but their presence there in terms of whether or not
And
they
it's
belong
not just
in it,
that, their
it's
photographs,
self-selected.
their press kits,
Uh-huh.
their schedules, get on our mailing list,
Yeah.
you know.
So you take in any singer-songwriter that...
Very, very eclectic,
Okay. Okay. How much of the
And
stuff...
let somebody else deal with it.
Sort it out, yeah,
Yeah.
well, that's true. I mean, you've just got a collection, they can...
Right. And I know what's not there from 50 years ago. People have come in and said, yeah, no. Well, no, nobody thought of it. But we have acquired some old stuff. I mean, a few things from Bob Black's, old stuff from... Is he young already? We have a complete set of his newsletters now. He gave us a copy of the first flyer that he put out for the first Bob Dylan concert.
I've got one too, he gave me one, yeah. He sold me one. I think we did it in trade, food, money.
Right.
Stuff like that. That was fun.
And he's promising his scrapbooks to us.
Oh, yeah, I've got, those are good for him.
But in
Those
terms
are
of
great.
festivals, we've got, recordings of the 1937, 1938 National Folk Festivals. Plus all the files up the wazoo on those events. The American Folk Song Festival, stuff from
Mhm.
the Asheville Festival, stuff from the Galax Festival.
But do you have documentation of that?
Galax?
Yeah.
Yeah, not so much recording at the festivals themselves, but going down there either around festival time or at other times to Galax to record people.
I see.
There's a series of recordings, acetate discs made in January 1939 in Galax, and 2 cuts by Wade Ward, the banjo player, on L2, Chilly Wind and Old Joe Clark, much emulated. And one day I went to look for the original sleeves, because what the collectors would do, they'd write in pencil usually, scrawl more often than not in pencil, side, record number 3, and then that would be renumbered once it got to 3 of that particular trip, side A1, titles, played by, occasionally a little more notes, And John and Al Lomax were not great penmanshippers. They fired art reading them, but all of a sudden, on that trip, beautiful block printing, everything totally legible. Pete Seeger, 19 years old. And we showed that to him. I said, Pete, that's you, isn't it? He said, yeah, that's... He has very good penmanship. He was and drawer, illustrator. He's done that.
I wouldn't think Pete would have anything other than perfect penmanship. How's the archive done in terms of ethnic communities in America, in terms of getting anything you might think of?
Ethnic,
Czech
okay.
materials,
The first major...
Puerto Rican material, any oddball stuff you might think
Well,
of that's different from...
Well, let's try it 2 different ways. Ethnic in the United States and music from other countries.
Right, and I was talking about the former,
Well, let
that's
me-
what I asked about.
Let me just give you an outline of this. Archive started in 1928 as the Archive of American Folk Song. That means it's an archive, a collection of raw, unpublished materials. At that time, basically, manuscripts and cylinders with some photographs, and then later disc recordings, and then some moving image and so on and so forth. American folk song music. Well, within 10 years, they were getting, those folk song collectors were getting spoken word.
Right.
Sometimes long, jack tales, sermons, church services, or talking about, conversing, So there you sort of whittle away at the song music image. Took years, though, to change the name. Within 10 years, we were getting stuff. Well, 1935, Alan Lomax went to the Bahamas because he'd recorded some Bahamian musicians in Florida. So he went. A couple years later, he went to Haiti. Then in 1936, we got a large collection from a woman named Ellen Heffron Roberts, who had wax cylinders and disc copies from cultures all over the world. So we had gone international within 10 years. It took years for the name to be changed to reflect that. Then the recording lab was created in 1941, so we could do preservation work and we could do duplication for customers, and we could make excellent quality recordings on the site, starting in 41. Then after the war, as I said, during the war, we started exchanges with other countries. You know, they'd get a bunch of our recordings, we'd get a bunch of their recordings. And that continued into the 50s through Europe, using, you know, certain kinds of PL40 money that, you know, was there and had to be used up, so they'd buy recordings, send libraries, something like that. And then the whole business, as I mentioned before, after World War II, helping to establish regional archives. So, you know, library Congress didn't have to do it all, exchanging and feeding into one to the other. Well, that's the, no. So already in 36 you were getting stuff, or 35 were getting stuff from other ethnic groups because they were from other countries.
Right.
Now what about ethnic groups in this country? The first major collections which had a more than just a small smattering, and well, the Lomaxes were getting, and Halpert were getting French language from Louisiana. There was a little bit of recording among the Pennsylvania Germans, but into the more ethnic stuff, first of all, the National Folk Festival, 1937 in Chicago. Sidney Robertson Cowell was there for the Settlement Administration, and Sarah Gertrude Knott set up that festival in 34. You know, with the idea of international folk dance and then music. And so there was always examples from various ethnic groups in the United States. Some watered down, like high school kids, sponsored by Pass Blue Ribbon in their costume. But she found a woman there from Minnesota who had contacts with the Finnish community, so she went up and recorded Finns. And then she had a project in northern New Jersey, which is now totally online, almost totally, recording the music of, folk music of various ethnic groups in Northern California, primarily in 38, 39, into 1940. At about the same time, Alan Lomax was starting to pick up ethnic groups in Michigan, Serbian, Finnish, French, others, there's Irish. And so more and more of that stuff was coming in.
Has that continued? Or has it lessened?
Oh, it's continued because the arts councils and folk arts people who have proliferated in the last couple of decades or more have certainly made a point of tapping and developing, helping the ethnic resources of their particular region or community.
Oh, absolutely. So you get it essentially from the public folklore.
Right, they publish it, and NEA gives them money, and part of the stipulation is whatever copies you print, a substantial number have to go back to the community.
Okay, but they also deposit,
yeah.
you didn't use the word deposit, and I'm not sure.
Yeah, and also the libraries had an equipment loan program starting in the late 30s, disc equipment, and then tape equipment, and then when the Folklife Center came along in 76, it beefed up, gave it a name, Equipment Loan Program.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, 200 or 300 projects, or I don't know how many now, and part of the stipulation is that the resultant recordings are available, if wanted, for the folk archive, and a lot of that stuff is at the museum.
Do you have any thoughts? Well, I was reading Phyllis Barr emailed me the notes that were typed up after the organizing meeting of the first Folk Alliance conference in Malibu in '89. And this was an effort, at the time, as I understand it, they did not have any idea of there being individual members. This was supposed to be an umbrella group of organizations throughout the country.
Yeah.
And one comment that's reflected in these notes, and you wouldn't know about it specifically, but I'm wondering if you've encountered this phenomenon, was they said that apparently everybody that showed up what we loosely call revivalists. They ran revival groups around the country, and they all, of course, got invitations, but they gave invitations.
There were no
to-
academic folklorists, there
Well,
were
there
no
were no
folk arts people involved with ethnic music.
There were no ethnic
Or-
groups.
or
That was what
represented-
this. There were no representatives of indigenous groups doing their own folklore in their own community,
Right.
even though they were invited. Everyone, and I don't know how many it was. They said because I've got an email out to some people who I want to ask about this, but they've got a non-numerical reference to we invited representatives of ethnic arts groups and indigenous communities,
was
and
gonna
no
pay
one
their way?
came. Yeah, but it does seem to me that the whole umbrella sort of these people participate in their own ways, but they don't join in with
Well, now they do.
larger groups labeled folklore.
Now they do. I mean, the Folk Alliance does have people from ethnic groups even on the board.
Yeah, they do.
And they've been more and more trying to aim at local, regional folk music and ethnic music wherever they meet.
Right. Yeah.
I've not followed the development or the origin of development of that. And the thing about individual members, I had forgotten that if I even knew it. I was sort of under the impression that one of their models was the International Bluegrass Music Association.
Probably.
Which is basically a trade association.
Yes.
Which now has its own building,
Yeah.
Owensburg, Kentucky. I mean, a lot of similarities there, and they have their annual huge convention. And they give awards to individuals, but maybe it is that is maybe more oriented to organizational membership.
Have you seen in your own journeys through this world that?
But I have a ball at those things. I love it. I love those things. See so many people.
Have you been to all the Folk Alliance conferences?
No, I started in D.C.
Okay,
Because nobody would pay my way. So
Were you there last year?
I started D.C. and I've been to every once in a while.
Okay, so we've been.
And I've had a table, my own table, last couple of years.
Oh, that's interesting.
For this last year. This year I will again.
Last year you did at Albuquerque?
Yeah.
Oh, but I was there. But I probably walked by your table. Might have signed the guest book.
I was right opposite. I didn't have a guest book. I was opposite Azalea City Records.
Okay, don't remember.
I had a table, not a booth this time. I have a booth. Number 312.
Okay. Have you, as you've gone through your various groups, you emailed me that you participated in Old Songs and Fox Hollow and...
Old Songs, I've been there twice.
Okay.
Fox Hollow. I always forget what the first year, but I was there every 1960s year, 70, 72, 74, and 76. And they did a total of 15.
Right. And then...
And you know what song Evelyn Beers ended the whole shebang with?
No.
Well, we ran into Evelyn
This is every
and
time.
Don at a wedding. Debbie Dildan's wedding. A little while after that, and she said none of us had gone, and so she sang the song that she ended the Sunday night of the last FOXHOLLOW, etc., etc.
Now, do these things bring out a different type? Is it mostly what we talked about? Anglo. Why don't blues people go to folklore gatherings? I don't see it where I go.
No. Well, it depends what kind of event it is. One of the earliest programs of the FSCW, like the third one, was 3 local black musicians. Ed Green, Flora Moulton, and John Jackson.
Did you get the black community there?
Not very much,
Yeah,
no.
I'm wondering why that. Pat Jasper does those programs, and she doesn't get the black community there. She does programs based on European. She does a lot of Czech accordion, and they're harder to
Well, there
spot.
are
Basically,
events.
she gets
There
the
are
same-
black events in the D.C. area that fill in black audiences. Mike List, who of course went here in folklore and ethnomusicology, was and is again what I would call the state folklorist of the District of Columbia. And he's had gospel program, and he's promoted all kinds of things like that.
And he does.
But it's the folk arts people that, well, I don't know about Pat Jasper, but
I think it's.
they seem to often, when they do something with an ethnic group, it's for the ethnic, as opposed to putting on a general festival. Now, maybe when Pat Jasper puts on a general Texas Festival
Yeah.
in Austin, most people who come are white.
Yeah, I don't see her programming too much to the groups in question. She did with a gospel show heavily, but she tends to play off her mailing list. And she's told me I can sell
Maybe
tickets and
yeah, sounds how it is. I don't know. Maybe in certain places the local musics are thriving enough. I don't know.
I'm just wondering if there's something about the folk rubric
I mean,
that
I
makes
should-
people think it doesn't have anything to do with them.
Oh, well, that's mean taking the word folk.
Yeah.
Oh, it's a weasel word.
Okay.
Like David Bidney used to say, Professor David Bidney, myth was his favorite weasel word. Legend. Well, myth and folklore is something that you have and I don't.
Yeah.
So here's an example. Ed Weldon, who I knew at Oberlin, and he was active archivist with capital A. He was working in the National Archives, and he was program chair for a Society for American Archivists meeting in St. Louis a few years ago. Invited me to do a paper. First time they've ever had a folklore archivist do a paper at the SAA. I think about 15 people came. But anyway, we got these nice invitations to a reception in the suite of the Coca-Cola archivist, some guy named Kurtz. And on the way up, Ed and I were talking, and he was a historian about what we had heard, little stories about Coca-Cola, like the mouse in the Coca-Cola bottle. In the early days, it's supposed to have a lot more cocaine. And so we finally go, and I was wondering, gee, would Coca-Cola be the only mixer? Well, they own Schweppes, so they'll take care of that. But we went over this guy, and I forgot to tell Ed, let me ask the question, because I would not have used the word folklore. But he did. He's not folklore. He said, well, you must get some very interesting folklore about Coca-Cola. Sent to you. This guy said, no, I don't know any folklore. We do get some interesting stories.
Yeah, I mean, maybe that's just maybe it's a word that sounds like it's about somebody else. I know there's a huge project in town here about collecting oral history regarding the blues scene in East Austin that's essentially dead now. It was one time an actual African American scene. The blues scene in Austin is Antones. Bringing in performers to paying audiences that are almost always white. And the guy who's doing it, Howard McMillan, was a UT guy. He has nothing to do with the world of folklore at Jasper. I mean, he sees it as, I think he sees that as something that other people are trying to dress up.
Well, some people have gone to the word traditional arts, and there is no, NEA doesn't have a folk arts unit anymore. It's sort of historical and cultural
They use
heritage.
the phrase heritage, right?
Yeah.
That's their buzzword
Yeah.
for heritage grants.
I don't particularly mind myself.
Right. Do you know Mark Wilson?
Oh, he was with Mark. He did some stuff
Rounder, yeah.
Some with Gus Mead,
Yeah.
Kentucky.
Lots of. He's done lots.
Gus
of
Mead was an old friend of mine.
Yeah, he's a
But Mark-
professor of philosophy now at the University of Pittsburgh. I mean, he's been a professor for years, but he was
I
in
just met him
Illinois.
glancingly 20 years ago.
Right. Okay. I talked to him on the phone a while ago. I'm going to try. I'm wondering what you might think of it. He does. I can show you. So he does very traditional recordings for Rounder. Here's a couple of them right now.
He still does, or these?
Still does.
Oh, okay.
It's all avocational. Rounder will pay his expenses, and he does it when he can. He used to do more of them. These are two things that he's done. I'm showing you Roger Cooper's CD and the Kentucky Old Time Banjo recently, and I talked to him on the telephone, and he is an absolute hardcore learn through oral tradition. Nobody from out of the tradition participate in the playing of the music on these records kind of guy. And do you feel there's any great value in that? He says that I'm sick of these folk revival hippies, and I know it's coming in and wanting to play with my musician friends on their records because they can never do it right, and they.
Well, I mean, it's one thing, somebody like that coming and wanting to be on the session. It's another thing for somebody like Andy Can, an Oberlin graduate, to go and live in the area, and who was it? One of the local musicians, somebody, they needed a banjo player, and there was nobody to do it. He did it.
Yeah.
He just, it was part of the group.
Right.
I don't know if it involved conversion of dress style and speech or
Right.
clothing, or food, that's interesting.
So it's not something that's terribly offensive to you, I mean, or to me, but I mean, he is.
No, it's a little off. I mean, there's the reason for that is there, to the extent, but on the other, see, as a folklorist, there's more in it for the folklorist, but the ethnomusicologist who goes in and studies the music of a community has to find out what is the music of a community.
Sure.
It's like the early folk song collectors. I don't want that song. No, don't do that. What a great way to turn on somebody you're interviewing. Right?
Yeah, right.
I don't want that song. That's too new. I don't want that. Whereas the others, and certainly ethnomusicologists, going into collections, what do you like?
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't seem to me that it's interfered with Mike Seeger's ability to learn various styles or to sound like, or to play with other musicians.
No, but he knows exactly what he's doing. He's not pretending to do anything else.
Absolutely. I mean, do you know Bruce Molsky or know of him?
Oh yeah, I've met Bruce. He's great.
Yeah, he's a great. See, Mark Wilson was, and I don't understand this because Bruce grew up in the South, I believe.
Virginia, I don't know.
Virginia, but Mark is somewhat irritated that somebody like that exists and records under the guise of a traditional musician, and I can't exactly tell you why, but I'm just wondering what, because it seemed.
Well, this seemed to be in terms of in terms of festival production. This seemed to be starting with the Smithsonian Festival, but not quite, and certain other festivals that got very rigorous to tap the local music without introducing people who from elsewhere who did the same thing, who were getting to do the same thing. But every once in a while, Rob would have Mike Seeger on, and the lines obviously are wavy and fuzzy. And when in '75 or '4, when they had workers' music, a lot of that, they had, Bob Bovey and Bodie Wagner and Bruce Phillips, of course, and Faith Petrick, who got, along with Sarah Gunning and Jim Garland. In fact, there was a picture in Jim Garland's autobiography, aside from the fact that there's a quote from Tillman Cagle describing my Uncle Harold being thrown in jail in Harlan, 1942. The other high point is a picture of Jim Garland at the Smithsonian Festival playing with Faith Petrick. And only it says Faith with folk singer Faith Folknick. Well, that's of course the name of the publication, which we'll go into. That's another story where that name came from. I can just see what happened. Photos are the last thing to get thrown into the book. We got photos, and captions of photos are the last of the last.
Right.
Well, who's this guy? Who's this woman? Who's this woman with Garland here? It says, and then may have called somebody. That's that. Her name is Faith. She's from San Francisco. Puts out that Folknick publication.
And they hear Faith Folknick.
She had never seen that. She didn't know anything about it. I showed it to her once in the archives. Folknick. Folknick was a derogatory word.
No, and Izzy
about that. Well, Izzy says, John Cohen says.
Yeah, they had this battle about who coined it.
Right.
But, no, I knew the derivation. conversation. It's now become, and what I imagine is very conscious irony. That's Nick Spitzer's email address. Folk Nick.
Yeah, for Folk Nick with a CK.
Yes, with a CK, but he knows what he's.
Well, you know, all the Folk Nick, you know, it was generally believed that those words were spin-offs of Sputnik.
Right.
But of course, Barbara K.G. did a nice article showing, you know, examples of much earlier words ending in Nick and how it is. Good Nick.
How did you get started as a kid?
New Haven. My mother had some songbooks. She played the piano. She used to do that in schools. She had the Fireside Book of Folk Songs and the Folk Song USA in the late 40s. And she liked to play the piano, and then my brother was learning piano, and we'd sit around, stand around the piano and sing, including out of those two songbooks. And some 1930s book of folk songs that she used to use in schools. Also, they had 78 albums when the word album meant album. They had Paul Robeson, they had Red Army Chorus, they had Carl Sandburg, they had Burl Ives. And I was singing, I loved to sing, and I was sang in church choirs. And my brother, the older brother, played piano, so I wouldn't touch that. So I didn't play any instrument. And then in 1949, my mother, who used to play ukulele, as Arthur Godfrey insisted it be pronounced ukulele, in college in the 20s, got one of Arthur Godfrey's plastic oops, a little book of songs, and left it lying around. And sure enough, little Joey picked it up, took it up to his room, closed the door, and started to figure out the chorus. Now, interestingly, I took it out. I'm left-handed. I do everything left-handed except bat. I don't bat anymore. Anyway, I picked it up, and I was playing it left-handed and figuring out the chords from the charts. It was pretty easy with only 4 strings. Then my parents produced a guitar that had steel string guitar that belonged to my grandmother in Texas. It had been hanging from a wall in the basement for years.